Greetings, friends. So you see, the communists, beginning in the late 19th century, and especially in the early 20th century, they were very clever little weasels. They never did much for themselves, but they spent their time thinking about how to bring down Western civilization because they just hated it, I guess. Maybe they were unhappy that they weren't able to participate in it. I mean, they're mostly continental thinkers. It wasn't so really like the Americans in the 19th century. Things were good. Things were fairly good in the 19th century in America. I mean, they had their Civil War and stuff, but America was doing fairly well. So maybe in some stagnating European countries, you got these really bitter intellectuals, and they came up with this philosophy that's still, tearing at us today. It's still this, this big threat to our freedom, as communism hasn't been entirely defeated. I mean, the Soviet Union came and went. Maoist China came and went. I mean, China is still officially communist, but these ideas could come back. So communism, especially from Russia, was concerned with a universal quality, that all the peoples of the world would be subjected to this universal revolution. The people, the workers, the farmers, and they would rise up because somehow they were being oppressed. Somehow they were being oppressed by the capitalist, the landlord, the business people. They were oppressing them, and they had to be a bloody revolution. That was the only way forward. So you have to divide humans. You have to divide them and set them one against the other, one group against the other group. This was the pathological genius of the communist thinkers, or the socialists, whatever you want to call them. And it was Leon Trotsky, out of this framework, who devised, I don't know if he devised the term racist, but he popularized it beginning in 1928. And I guess the term racist and racism would have become more popular in the 1930s. And so that was basically the beginning of the term. Maybe it had some, minor usage before that, but it was basically the communists. And they invented this to shame their fellow Slavs, well, in this case, Russia, for being proud in their own Slavic culture, their Orthodox Church, their other practices and customs, their story. And it was basically because communism had to expand to all the peoples of the world. So you can't be looking down on a different group. You have to be on the same level as them. So how dare you criticize another group? So you're a racist, and that's how it caught on. It was just a slander term. It was designed to eliminate discussion. No more intellectual debate. And of course, Trotsky himself was snuffed out by Stalin later on when he fled to Mexico. So, these communist intellectuals, a lot of them were eaten by their own system. Some of them escaped to the United States and then infected the United States, especially in places like California. The Nazis were leftists too. I mean, they were the National Socialists. They were a bit more nationalist, maybe not so universal. So maybe that's why the Soviets came up with racism. So yeah, it's just become this really hurtful term when you're using this word. And I know a lot of us still use it because that person was so racist to me. And that's one thing if you're saying to your friend, yeah, I experienced racism. What you mean is you experienced hatred towards you based on some physical characteristic about yourself. Or it could be just the fact that you belong to a certain culture. But it's a different matter to call someone a racist, and expect that you're doing something productive, right? That's name calling in general, I don't think gets us anywhere. And you just have to remember that this word racism and racist was just this clever plan designed to unravel the West. And you see, racism comes out of multiculturalism, right? What is multiculturalism about? There are no core values. What does Justin Trudeau say? maybe he's changed his tack, but for a long time he said there are no core Canadian values. Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister of Canada, if you don't know. So he said that. I think he was out at the Stampede in Calgary, the popular event every year out west, and maybe he changed his tune and he might have said something like there are Canadian values. But for a long time he's been saying there's no core Canadian values, right? So it has that universal quality. All humans, despite all the great differences in history and culture and genetics, despite all of those factors, they're all just the same silly putty, the same clay that you can mold, you can put it in the oven, you can bake it, and then they'll come out and they'll all be the same dimension, and they won't have any capacity to think independently and pursue their own culture, enact their own story. So racism comes out of that destructive framework of thinking of multiculturalism, which itself comes out of communism. And it's a ridiculous word, racism, just like feminism is a ridiculous word. It takes a real word, female, and then it becomes feminism. Would you take male and then make it into maleism, or men and menism? It's ridiculous. So I don't know the history of race, but sure, race is a real thing, but that doesn't mean that you can then sensibly turn that into the word racist, unless it does so organically over time, which language does. But that's not what happened here. This was imposed from above, but I guess it caught on because the power dynamics are so seductive that people want to use that term as a slander term, because this person is threatening to you, something they're doing is threatening, so just call them a racist. Supremacist is just a variant of that term. So these people who call you racist or a supremacist, they're not interested in thinking. They're not interested in debate. They don't want to listen to what you have to say. They're hateful people. And but rather than just say I hate you because so and so, they just say, well, you're a racist, you're a supremacist. They don't really get into an intellectual argument with you. So I mean, it doesn't matter what you can do. I mean, I'm involved in Africa, and most Africans are not hateful towards whites, but some Africans, when they see a white man involved in Africa as a capitalist, they just don't like that, and it's just that's something that they think it doesn't matter what you do. You could employ hundreds of people and build things in the community that are going to be enterprises that'll last basically for Africans. And but no, you must be a white supremacist. Clearly, you're just doing something sly, and I can have a very good friendship with my Ghanaian friend in Ghana, but clearly he's a white supremacist too, because he's internalized the racism. I talked about this in an old video, well, from half a year ago, when not long after Trump's election, around the Super Bowl season in November, there was this video on YouTube of this. It's called Black Trump Supporter Red Pills Shia LaBeouf live stream, where Shia LaBeouf, if you don't know, that annoying actor who was doing this live stream to protest against Trump in New York City, and I don't want to make this about Trump, okay? It's not really about politics, but this black Trump supporter crashed it, and I thought the video was really good. He's like doing all these red pills about how the media is fucked and you're all brainwashed by this, and the black Trump supporter was saying, look, I mean, like, it's a problem that people don't want to assimilate to the West. That was one of the things. So I posted this on social media, and I got a response from someone who was really annoyed, and the first thing they said when I posted this link was, quote, internalized racism at its finest. That was what this young man had to say. And he's obviously someone who thinks that Donald Trump is Hitler and come to kill us all and will throw us in concentration camps, and he said some other things too, but basically, yeah, so he sincerely believes that a black man who supports Donald Trump must only clearly be an expression of internalized racism. And I would add that the person who commented is a government employee, so maybe that says a lot. And I mean, yeah, if you're more caught up in the government and the government's more part of your life, then maybe you will be indoctrinated by more of these terms. Maybe women are more indoctrinated by these terms than men, because they tend to rely on the government more than men for welfare, for financial assistance. Not all women. I'm just saying in general. And so that's basically where racism came from. It's a destructive word. It's not helpful. I understand if you use it in your conversation, but name calling in general isn't going to get us anywhere. And let's be honest, I mean, race is real. I mean, genetics are real. And I've traveled all over the world and had the privilege of living with Guatemalans, Colombians, Ghanaians, not really Tanzanian. I mean, I lived in Tanzania, but I can't say I really lived with Tanzanians. Lived in India, not really with, Indians up close in the same house, but certainly with different groups. And, all the peoples of the world are wonderful and great. We all have our strengths, our unique cultures. But it's not like we're all the same, right? We're actually fairly different in many ways, and similar in many ways. And most of that's culture, thankfully, in my opinion. I think most of it's culture, but you can't deny that genetics are a real factor too. And I mean, Asians are more intelligent, at least in terms of math, than whites on average. Jews are very intelligent. So not all the different groups score the same way in intelligence. I mean, it depends on how you define that. But yeah, I mean, it is true that there are differences. So I can totally understand the desire for some groups to want to keep to themselves. That's just a natural habit. But that doesn't mean that, they need to be somehow instructed that, no, you are equal to all the other groups. And in fact, you must love all humans. Right? That's kind of like love. You must love Big Brother in the movie, in the book 1984. You must love the state who cares for you, and you must love all your brethren. We're all created equal. And to be honest, I think evolution, the way it's being interpreted in popular science, in mainstream science education, I think it has kind of gone along with this narrative because, I don't think humans came from apes. I think it's probably, there's some relation, but at this point, enough time has gone by that we haven't found any missing links. The apes are so different from humans. I've talked about that subject before. I don't need to get off into evolution here. But look, yeah, I'm just saying the races are different, but most of that's culture. But you see, the thing about culture is it's a story, it's a game, right? It's a game you're playing. Capitalism is a game you're playing. It's a really real and important game, but it's part of Western culture, right? So every culture is a game. Even if you're a hunter-gatherer society, there's a certain game you're playing where you produce meaning in a certain way, you produce value in a certain way. So that's important. Culture needs a genetic framework to stand on. That's not the only thing, though. Genetics aren't all that culture is. Just like culture needs a geographic area, it needs a real place, right? So there's all of these things make up culture. But culture is the most important thing. Anyone can assimilate to the West, right? I don't think mass immigration works, but taking the thinking of Ricardo Duchesne, the intellectual who's really should be even more publicized than people like Jordan Peterson. Really? No, check out Ricardo Duchesne. Anyways, his thinking is like, if you want other people from very far off and different regions of the world to assimilate to the West, it has to be a slow, gradual process where minorities are basically they have to adapt and learn the local language, and over time, sure, they can assimilate, and dare I say even interbreed. When I suggested that I might one day marry a Ghanaian woman, no plans to do this, just something I was throwing out there in an old MGTOW video. Some people were like, well, that's just immoral, that's just completely wrong. So yeah, racial mixing, it should not be forced on humans, but falling onto the other end of the spectrum, like, oh, all the groups must preserve their purity, I can understand that, but maybe I wouldn't say it should be prescribed, but I don't think you should demonize some people if they want to produce interracial children. I mean, slowly, organically, hopefully in a situation where it's one culture or the other. It's not like you're trying to make them into a double culture person. Well, I mean, something like that would result anyways. I mean, it has to be responsible, right? A single mother is not going to do a good job on her own if she doesn't have assistance to raise children. So racism race is real, but in terms of racism, not useful at all to entertain this term. I mean, these people, they just hate, right? That's all it is. They're just hateful people. So there's no point in trying to argue with them. They're really just trying to say, I hate you because so-and-so, because you're black, because you're white, because of all these, because of any reason there could be. But at least in the past, there wasn't this preoccupation with race. I mean, of course, the Europeans were aware that people in Africa were different, and people in the Americas before the white man came there were different. But they mainly just called them savages, right? So, I mean, that's derogatory, but it's more of a cultural thing. Oh, they're all just savages. They're not Western, they're not Christian, right? They're not moral like us. They don't have the technology as us. They're not, I mean, there wasn't even money in the Inca Empire or anything like that. It was a very different world that the Europeans were coming into. And so these different groups, I said I didn't believe in evolution. I don't know. I mean, why are we on the same planet anyways? Why are we fighting and striving with each other on the same planet? I mean, certain cultures maybe are superior to others. They may have to slowly accommodate and encompass other cultures over time. Western civilization has been very successful, but now it's unraveling. So we're just gonna hurt ourselves if we fall into these words. Racist, all this, the communist ideology, it's still pervasive, still trying to undermine us. But I think that the tide is starting to shift. I think that people don't care anymore if you call them a racist. It's just been, like with any term, if you overuse it, it will just burn out. People will just be like, well, all right, I mean, I'm a white supremacist, I'm a racist, right? I mean, it's ridiculous at this point. If I'm spending so much time and resources in Africa, it doesn't matter. They would just be like, oh, well, you're just doing that to be an evil capitalist oppressor. So anyways, I mean, it's the one last point I want to make in this video is that even if you say, oh no, it's sensible to use the word racist, and you have some argument to say why it's sensible, and it's like, well, actually, if you look in the dictionary, it doesn't seem very sensible because there's multiple definitions of racism. Like, one is just what I was talking about, like you just hate someone based on some physical characteristic or their culture, which of course is already complicated because there could be people assimilated to one culture, but they could be from different genetic heritage. Right? So I'm from Toronto, most multicultural city in the world, or multiracial, multigenetic, for sure. And a lot of people don't assimilate, but people do. And I've seen the optimistic side of it. Like my landlord, his family, they're I guess originally from India, but then they lived in South America, and somewhere in the Caribbean, I'm not sure. So I guess that you could call them like West Indian. And his son, Phil, is like the most Canadian guy. I mean, he's just like, but sure, he has brown skin and I guess South Asian features. But this guy is like a hardworking chef, and he's like contributing to the economy. They're managing this house and in this neighborhood, and it's like they're just Canadians, like whatever, right? They're totally assimilated. But also around in the neighborhood with mass migration, all of these groups don't assimilate, and then that's the perfect climate that the communists wanted. They always wanted that. They wanted to just fuck things up with all these different groups that didn't assimilate, and then that's the perfect time to say, aha, see, they're being racist to you because now your rent is going up and times are getting harder for you. Blame this other group. They're oppressing you. Very pathological, but clever. So getting back to what I was saying is there's that first definition, still murky, of racism as just hate towards your physical characteristics or your culture. But then there's another definition of it just being discrimination. And that's really problematic. It's like, well, who doesn't discriminate? By that definition, everyone's a racist. If you take the definition that racism is discrimination based on one's skin color or physical characteristics, then everyone in the fucking world is a racist. Because are you telling me you don't discriminate, at least in your mind, when you're walking down the street and you see Asians or blacks or Latinos or other white people? I mean, even if it's your same culture, you're going to discriminate, you're going to form stereotypes on so many different things, including the clothing that the people are wearing, including the way they're walking, their body language, all of these things. But you can't exclude skin color from that. I mean, it's just natural. Even if you say, oh, I'm not a racist, no. But it's like, I mean, the Minority Report, that world where they'll read your thoughts, they'll read your dreams, and they'll all say, oh yes, you're a racist. You were dreaming about it. You were thinking it. Therefore, you are a racist because you formed a stereotype. Because stereotypes aren't useful. No, of course stereotypes are useful. We wouldn't survive without stereotypes. It's just something we do. Oh, this animal bites me a lot, and so next time I see that animal, I'm prepared that it might bite me. That's just a natural survival strategy, not to take this into evolution, because of course I have controversial views on that. But you see what I'm saying? You can't say that you don't discriminate. Discriminate has this negative connotation, but it's the same as just distinguishing. I mean, you can't distinguish. This is, what was her name? Tomi Lahren. Was that her name? Some blonde YouTuber went on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, that annoying idiot. And she told him, I don't see race. Like, I don't see color. And I know exactly what she was trying to say. What I've been trying to say here, that your character is all that matters. Your deeds, your actions are all that matters. God will, or the universe, whatever it is, they will just judge you for the person you were individually and what you did in your life, what your intentions were, what the weight of your heart. In the Egyptian mythology, your heart gets weighed, and lest it not be too heavy, so you'll be eaten. But Tomi Lahren, everyone laughed at her, and these were all libtards laughing at her. But maybe it's not the smartest thing to say, I don't see race, because we all do see it. But acting on what we see without knowing what the person is like or what their character is, that's an entirely different matter. And that moves into hateful prejudice if we do act not knowing anything about this person. But you can't shame us for taking preventative measures to protect ourselves in certain circumstances. When we just stereotype, everyone does it. And the last thing, so that point there was just showing you the problematic nature of the word racist, even if you do think it's sensible to be using the word. It has different definitions that seem to contradict or are at odds with one another, and then the whole use of racism is just trying to destroy Western civilization. So I think Tomi Lahren, maybe she could have put it a better way when she was talking to Trevor Noah. And one more thing I wanted to conclude this video is that, we are all on this earth together, so we have to find some way of getting along. But maybe maybe they'll still continue to be individual races for some time. It's okay to have maybe some intermediaries between them to achieve the real assimilation that would be necessary for a flourishing culture. I mean, the British Empire wasn't perfect. The Roman Empire wasn't perfect. Maybe we can aspire to something better, some sort of better version of those empires, which were multiracial, multi-ethnic empires, right? That's the whole point. They were participating in a common project with common ideals, and I think it worked out well, at least for a time. So those are my thoughts on racism. There's probably a few other things I could say, but I made a few notes here, but that's basically it. Hope you enjoyed that. Hasta luego, amigos.